My parents announced a Hawaii trip in front of 30 people, called it a gift for the whole family, and let me smile for about 5 seconds before my father corrected me. I wasn't invited. I was staying home to watch my sister's kids, because apparently someone had to be useful while the real family went on vacation. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I honestly thought I understood my place in my family. I didn't like it, not really, but I understood it. I was the dependable one, the one with the flexible schedule, the one who could be called on early, late, last minute, no warning, no real asking. If my mother needed place cards written, I wrote them. If my father needed his Medicare paperwork sorted, I sorted it. If my sister Lauren needed someone to watch Ethan and Lily because she was overwhelmed again, I drove across town and did it. I told myself that was love. I told myself that being needed was close enough to being valued. The Bennett family house sits on a quiet street outside Boston, the kind of street where everybody's hedges look professionally trimmed, even when they swear they do it themselves. White siding, black shutters, a front porch my mother decorates for every season, like the neighbors are grading her. My father, Richard Bennett, retired a few years ago after managing a regional bank branch for most of his adult life. He still reads the paper in the same leather chair every morning, still talks like a man who expects things to be handled without raising his voice. My mother, Margaret, never had a paid job, but she could make unpaid control look like public service. Church committees, charity luncheons, neighborhood fundraisers, anniversary dinners, reputation, reputation, reputation. Then there was Lauren, my younger sister by 3 years, who somehow came into the world already forgiven for everything. She married Bradley Whitaker, a corporate attorney with a downtown firm, and after that my mother stopped introducing Lauren as her daughter and started introducing her as Bradley's wife, like that was a promotion for all of us. They had Ethan first, then Lily, and from the minute those kids were born, my role in the family got even smaller and somehow heavier. I became Aunt Claire, but not in the sweet way people say it on birthday cards. More like the person you call when the nanny cancels, the person who knows where the fever medicine is, the person who can sit on the floor and do puzzles while everyone else has wine in the dining room. Even little things had a way of reminding me where I stood. Lauren and Bradley's SUV always got the driveway when they came over. My old silver Honda went on the street, sometimes 2 houses down if the neighbors had company. "Claire, move your car," my mother would say before Lauren even pulled in. Bradley hates blocking the sidewalk, and people notice cars first. I would laugh like it was nothing and grab my keys. That was the trick, really. If you act like something doesn't hurt, people get comfortable doing it again. Holidays were where the arrangement became almost official. Thanksgiving started for me at 6 a.m. in my mother's kitchen, peeling potatoes while she stood behind me correcting the size of the cubes. I handled the turkey, the sides, the silverware, the seating chart, the emergency run for whipped cream when my father forgot it, and the dishwasher afterward, because my mother's back was acting up. Lauren usually arrived around noon, in something cream-colored and expensive, carrying 1 bakery pie and both children in need of immediate attention. Everyone acted like she had crossed the desert to get there. I was usually sweating through my blouse and still got asked if I could take Lily upstairs for a nap before dinner. Christmas was the same thing, with more wrapping paper. I wrapped the gifts my mother bought, including the ones with Lauren's name on the tag. I kept the receipts, changed the batteries, cleaned cranberry sauce off the runner, and took family photos from the side so everyone else could be in them. One year, Lauren gave me a glittery apron that said, "World's Best Aunt." She meant it as a cute gift, I think. Or maybe she didn't think at all. My mother told me to put it on right away because it was so me. I wore that stupid apron while I carved ham, packed leftovers, and washed dishes until my hands were red. I wish I could say I saw it clearly then, but I didn't. Not all at once. I had this little lie I kept feeding myself, and it sounded reasonable enough that I could live inside it. Family helps family. My schedule is flexible. Lauren has more pressure. Mom doesn't mean it that way. Dad just avoids conflict. If I make things easier, maybe one day they'll notice. Maybe one day somebody will say, "Claire, sit down, we saved you a plate," and mean it. The strange part is, I did have something of my own. I just kept it so quiet it almost felt like it belonged to somebody else. 3 years earlier, after a breakup that left me feeling like a piece of furniture someone had finally decided to throw out, I bought a used Canon camera from a pawn shop downtown. My ex, Kevin, had told me I was always just there, and I hated how much I believed him. So I started walking around Boston, taking pictures of people nobody looked at for more than a second. Women waiting at bus stops, night cleaners outside office buildings, tired cashiers after closing, older women sitting alone in diners with both hands wrapped around coffee cups. I posted the photos anonymously under a series called Invisible Women. For 3 years, that camera was the only thing I didn't share. I kept it wrapped in a gray scarf in the back of my closet, behind tax folders and old sweaters. The account grew slowly, then faster. 12,000 followers by the time everything happened, though no one in my family knew. The only person I told was Aunt Elise, my mother's younger sister, who had been treated like a cautionary tale for as long as I could remember, because she moved to Carmel by the Sea and opened a small cafe with a pottery studio instead of living the proper life. My mother called her irresponsible. I called her every Sunday night. Aunt Elise was the first person who looked at one of my photographs and didn't say it was nice. She said, "Claire, this is real." I remember holding the phone and not answering because my throat closed up. A few weeks before my parents' anniversary dinner, she admitted she had sent my page to a gallery owner she knew named Daniel Mercer. I panicked at first, honestly. I was embarrassed, almost angry, because having someone take my work seriously felt more dangerous than having it ignored. Then Daniel emailed me from Coastal Light Gallery and asked if I would be open to discussing a possible solo exhibition. I stared at that email for 20 minutes and still didn't answer right away. That's how trained I was to doubt good things. I had client invoices to finish, my mother's anniversary dinner to help organize, Lauren's kids' schedule saved in my phone, and this tiny, impossible door opening on the other side of the country. I told myself I'd reply after the party. I told myself one more family event wouldn't hurt. I told myself I could get through the dinner, smile, serve, clean up, and then maybe think about my own life for once. That was before my father stood up with a champagne glass in his hand and announced, Hawaii. The anniversary dinner was supposed to be my mother's big production, which meant it started becoming my problem about 2 weeks before anyone else considered it real. She wanted 30 guests, white roses, gold-rimmed plates, place cards in actual calligraphy, and a catered menu that somehow still required me in the kitchen for most of the night. I took 3 days off from client work to help because my mother said the caterer was perfectly competent but not family, which was one of those sentences that sounded warm until you realized it meant I was free labor again. I got to the house at 7 a.m. the morning of the party wearing jeans, sneakers, and my hair in a knot because there was no point pretending I was a guest. My mother already had lists taped to the refrigerator. Flowers in the dining room, candles checked by 5, crystal rinsed, not wiped, because paper towels left lint. She moved through the kitchen with that tight little energy she got when people were coming over and the house needed to lie convincingly. My father stayed out of the way, which was his usual contribution. Every now and then he walked through and said, "Looks great, Claire," like that counted as helping. By 5 p.m., the living room had been turned into a dinner space, with long rented tables running almost wall to wall. I had written every place card by hand, including one for myself near the hallway, not quite at the kids' table, not quite with the adults either. I remember staring at it longer than I should have. Claire Bennett in blue ink, slightly off-center because my hand was tired by then. I almost moved it closer to Lauren's spot, then stopped myself because I could hear my mother already. "Don't make this complicated. It's just seating." At 6 p.m., I went upstairs and changed into a plain black dress I'd brought in a garment bag. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and it fit. When I came back down, my mother caught me near the stairs and gave me that quick head-to-toe look that always made me feel 12 years old. "Black?" she said. I told her I thought it was simple. She pressed her lips together and said, "It's fine. Just remember tonight is about your father and me." I said, "Of course," because apparently even my dress needed to understand its place. Guests started arriving a little after 7. Church friends, old bank colleagues, neighbors, a couple of cousins I only saw at events where my mother wanted the room to look full. I carried trays, refilled glasses, answered the door twice, and got mistaken for catering once before the salad course. A woman with pearl earrings asked me where she should put her coat, and when I said I could take it, she smiled and asked, "Are you with the service?" I opened my mouth, but my mother appeared beside me so fast it was almost impressive. "Oh, that's Claire," she said lightly. "Our other daughter. She's helping out tonight." Our other daughter. Helping out. The woman looked embarrassed for half a second, then handed me her coat anyway. I carried it upstairs to my parents' bedroom and stood there for a moment among all those other coats, breathing through my nose. It wasn't even the worst thing anyone had said to me. That was the problem. It was ordinary enough to slide under the skin and stay there. Lauren and Bradley arrived at 7:20 p.m., which was late enough that everyone noticed and early enough that no one called it rude. Lauren wore a red wrap dress and heels that clicked across the foyer like she was entering a restaurant. Bradley came behind her in a charcoal suit, with Ethan and Lily looking freshly scrubbed, both already tired. My mother lit up like the party had finally started. She hugged Lauren, kissed Bradley on both cheeks, praised the children, and pulled them into the room as if she were presenting the real family to the guests. I was holding a tray of stuffed mushrooms when my mother raised her voice and said, "Everyone, you remember Lauren and Bradley? Bradley just handled that big corporate case downtown. We're so proud." People turned, smiled, asked questions, made all the right sounds. Nobody mentioned that I had prepared Lauren's tax documents for free the past 4 years because Bradley was too slammed and Lauren couldn't deal with numbers. Nobody mentioned that I had spent the whole day making sure this room looked effortless. I stood by the kitchen doorway with mushrooms cooling on a silver tray and watched my sister be applauded for arriving. 10 minutes later, Bradley handed Lily to me without really looking. "Can you take her for a bit?" he asked, already scanning the room for someone more useful to talk to. Ethan wrapped both arms around my leg and said he was hungry. I took them into the kitchen, got Lily some crackers, cut Ethan's chicken into pieces, cleaned juice off the front of Lily's dress, and told them they were doing great, even though I hadn't eaten anything myself. I could hear laughter from the dining room. I could hear my mother telling the story of how she and Dad met for probably the 1,000th time. The one where she makes it sound like they built a life out of devotion and shared sacrifice. When dessert came out, I was still in the kitchen rinsing plates. My place card was gone by then. I don't know if someone moved it or if I had imagined that it was ever meant to matter. I came out just as my father stood and tapped his champagne glass with a fork. The room settled. My mother sat beside him, glowing, one hand over her heart like she was already receiving a standing ovation. Lauren leaned into Bradley's shoulder. I stood near the kitchen doorway with a damp towel in my hand and a dull ache behind my eyes. My father thanked everyone for coming. He talked about 40 years of marriage, about building a family, about blessings, about how proud he was of the life he and my mother had made. Then he smiled in this rehearsed way and said they had one more surprise. Next week, he announced, Patricia and I are taking the whole family to Hawaii. 1 week in Maui, just us, to continue the celebration properly. The room reacted exactly how he wanted. Gasps, clapping, little cheers. Lauren actually squealed and covered her mouth. My mother looked pleased enough to float. For one stupid second, I let myself be happy. I pictured ocean air and hotel sheets and a week where nobody asked me to clean a kitchen. I pictured myself standing beside the water with my camera, not sneaking time for it, not hiding it, just holding it in public like it belonged in my hands. I stepped forward before I could talk myself out of it and asked, "That sounds amazing. What time is our flight?" My father's smile dropped so quickly I felt it in my stomach. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at Lauren. Lauren looked down at her dessert plate. That was when I understood that everyone who mattered already knew something I didn't. My father cleared his throat and said, "Claire, you don't need the flight time." I laughed a little because I thought maybe I'd missed a joke. I said, "What do you mean?" And my mother's face tightened like I had embarrassed her by not reading the script. "You're not coming," my father said, in front of all 30 guests. "Someone needs to stay behind with Ethan and Lily so Lauren and Bradley can actually rest." He said it calmly, like he was explaining a seating arrangement. My mother added, "They've been exhausted, Claire. You know how hard it is for them." Lauren's eyes were shiny, but she still didn't speak. Bradley took a sip of champagne and looked toward the window, like this had nothing to do with him. I stood there in my black dress, with a damp towel twisted in both hands, and the room went quiet in that awful way people get quiet when they're grateful the humiliation is happening to someone else. I heard somebody shift in their chair. I heard a fork touch a plate. Then a woman near the end of the table whispered, not softly enough, "Poor thing, she must be used to it by now." That was the line that did it. Not my father excluding me, not my mother making it sound reasonable, not Lauren sitting there letting me be assigned like childcare. It was that stranger understanding my life in one sentence. I said, "Of course, I understand." My voice sounded normal, which scared me more than crying would have. I folded the towel once, set it on the sideboard, and walked back into the kitchen before anyone could decide whether they should comfort me or pretend nothing happened. Behind me, my father started talking again, smoothing the room over with a joke about needing sunscreen. People laughed too quickly. The party kept going because parties always keep going when the person being hurt is not important enough to stop them. I stayed in the kitchen for the rest of the party because I didn't trust my face in that room anymore. I washed glasses I hadn't drunk from, scraped dessert plates I hadn't been served, and listened to my family accept congratulations for a trip I had been erased from in public. Every few minutes, someone pushed through the swinging door with another dirty dish or an empty bottle, and I smiled because my hands knew what to do, even when the rest of me felt like it had gone cold. That was the worst part. I was humiliated, but I was still useful, so nobody had to deal with what they had just done. Lauren came in about 20 minutes later, red dress swishing around her knees, face arranged into concern. She leaned against the counter like we were two sisters having a private little moment, not like she had just watched me get assigned to her children in front of a room full of people. "Claire, please don't be upset," she said. "You know Bradley and I really need this. We haven't had real time together in forever." I kept rinsing a crystal glass under warm water. I wanted to say, "Then hire someone." I wanted to say, "You didn't even ask me." What came out was nothing. She took that silence as permission to keep going. Lauren always did. And honestly, the kids adore you. Ethan listens to you better than he listens to me, And Lily already thinks of your place as her second home." She smiled like that was supposed to soften it, but all I heard was how neatly she had turned my life into overflow storage for hers. Then she pulled out her phone and started reading from a list Bradley had made. Bedtimes, snacks, allergies, swim class, screen time rules, the eardrops Lily might need if she started tugging at her left ear again. She didn't ask if I could do it. She was updating me on the job I had already been given. Bradley appeared in the doorway right as Lauren was telling me where they kept the extra car seats. He had loosened his tie and looked slightly annoyed, like the emotional part of this was taking too long. "All good?" he asked her, not me. Lauren nodded. He gave me one of those quick professional smiles people give receptionists and said, "Thanks, Claire. Seriously, this will be huge for us." Then they left before I could answer, and I stood there with my hands in dishwater, staring at Lauren's text message as it landed on my phone. 14 screenshots of schedules. 14 pages of proof that my agreement had never been required. By midnight, the last guest had finally gone. My parents went upstairs exhausted from being celebrated. Lauren and Bradley left with the kids half asleep and sticky from dessert. I was alone in the living room, folding rented tablecloths and stacking leftover place cards in a little pile. Mine was there, bent at one corner, smeared slightly with something brown. I picked it up and laughed once under my breath, not because it was funny, but because, of course, even my name card had ended the night dirty and discarded. I needed to send a file to a client before I drove home. I had pushed the deadline twice for my mother's party, and the guilt of that sat in my stomach right next to everything else. My laptop was back at my apartment, but my mother's was open on the kitchen counter. I told myself she wouldn't care. She had borrowed my time, my weekends, my labor, my car, my patience, my entire adult life without asking, so using her laptop for 2 minutes did not feel like a crime. Safari was already open when the screen woke up. Her Gmail was still logged in, and my name was sitting right there in the subject line. The thread title was Hawaii Arrangements, Claire Situation. I remember my finger hovering over the trackpad. I knew I should close it. I knew there are some things you can't unread, and part of me was still stupid enough to want an excuse for them. Maybe they had discussed surprising me separately. Maybe there was some explanation that would make the night less ugly. I clicked it because I needed to know whether I had been hurt by accident or managed on purpose. The first email was from my mother to Lauren, sent a week before the party. "We'll keep Claire here with the children. She doesn't have anything important going on anyway, and it saves you and Bradley the cost of extra childcare. Honestly, it's like having free help." I stopped breathing for a second. Then I read Lauren's reply. "That works. She'll probably feel useful, honestly. It's kind of sad, but at least it helps us." I read it again because my brain rejected it the first time. Free help. Feel useful. Kind of sad. There it was, written calmly, planned in advance, not said in anger, not said under pressure, not misunderstood across a loud room. I took screenshots with hands that were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I emailed them to myself, then deleted the sent message and cleared the browser history, because even after finding out I was being used, I was still careful not to make a mess in my mother's kitchen. That detail bothers me now. I wish I had slammed the laptop shut or walked upstairs and woken everybody up. Instead, I stood there in the dark like a thief, protecting people who had just called me free help. That is how deep the training went. I drove home a little after 1 a.m. through streets that looked too clean and quiet for how loud my head was. My apartment was nothing impressive, just a one-bedroom with beige carpet and a radiator that hissed in winter. But when I shut the door behind me, I could finally breathe without performing. I sat on the floor beside my bed and opened Daniel Mercer's email again. Coastal Light Gallery, possible solo exhibition, full portfolio review. Words from a life where someone wanted to see what I had made, not what I could do for them. At 1:43 a.m., I called Aunt Elise. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and worry. "Claire, what happened?" I told her everything, and I made it through most of it without crying. The only time my voice broke was when I read her the line about free help. She was quiet for a long moment after that, and then she said, "I have a room above the cafe. Daniel is 20 minutes away. If you want to leave, you leave." I started telling her all the reasons I couldn't, because I had clients and rent and family and obligations and fear sitting on my chest like a grown man. She cut me off gently and said, "No, sweetheart, you have habits. That's different." I didn't sleep. By 6 a.m., I had 3 suitcases open on the bed and my Canon wrapped in the gray scarf beside them. I packed clothes, documents, hard drives, camera batteries, the few framed photos I actually cared about, and the little box where I kept every memory card from the Invisible Women project. I left the glittery World's Best Aunt apron folded on the kitchen chair. I didn't throw it away. I didn't need a dramatic gesture. I just needed it not to come with me. I went back to my parents' house 2 days before their Hawaii flight, not because I owed them an explanation, but because I knew if I disappeared without saying anything, they would make the story about my instability. That was one thing the Bennett family knew how to do. They could take the person they had cornered, call her emotional, and suddenly the corner became her fault. So I drove over with my phone in my coat pocket, the screenshots saved, my suitcase already packed at home, and my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. My mother was in the living room, surrounded by resort clothes. Sundresses were draped over the couch, sandals lined up near the coffee table, sun hats stacked on the ottoman like she was preparing for a magazine spread instead of a vacation. Lauren sat beside her, scrolling through restaurant photos in Maui, probably checking which ones looked best for Instagram. My father was in his chair with the newspaper open, though I knew he wasn't reading it. He had that stillness he got when he sensed conflict and hoped staying quiet would make it pass over him. "I need to tell you something," I said from the doorway. My mother didn't even look up at first. She held a linen shirt against a pair of white pants and said, "If this is about the children's schedule, Lauren already sent it. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stood there for a second longer than I meant to, because even then, even with everything I knew, part of me wanted her to look at me like a daughter. She didn't. So I said, "I'm not watching Ethan and Lily. I won't be here." Lauren's head snapped up. My mother froze with the shirt still in her hands. My father slowly lowered the newspaper, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the first time they all really looked at me that week was when I stopped being useful. My mother asked what I meant in that careful voice she used when guests had broken something expensive. I told her I had a professional opportunity in California and I was leaving the next morning. I didn't explain the gallery, not right away. I didn't want to hand them something precious while they were still deciding whether I had the right to hold it. Lauren stood up so fast her phone slid off her lap and hit the rug. "Claire, no, you can't just do that. We planned this whole trip around you." I nodded once because that sentence did more work than she realized. "I know," I said. "You planned around me without asking me." Bradley wasn't there yet, which was probably good because I might have lost my nerve if he started talking over me with that lawyer voice of his. My mother recovered first. She set the shirt down and stood, shoulders back, face already hardening into disappointment. "This is selfish," she said. "Your sister needs help. Family comes first." I had heard that sentence so many times it should have worked. It used to go straight into the soft part of me and press until I apologized. This time it landed differently. I looked at the resort clothes, the folded swimsuits, the expensive sandals, the printed itinerary on the coffee table with 4 adult names and 2 children's names, not mine. "Family comes first," I repeated, "except when the family goes to Hawaii." My mother's mouth tightened. Lauren looked away. My father cleared his throat, but he didn't defend me. Of course he didn't. "If you leave now," he said, "don't expect everyone to act like nothing happened when you come back." There was the threat, finally, dressed up as dignity. I looked at him and felt something sadder than anger. My father had watched me be used for years, and the one time I stepped out of the role, he treated my absence like betrayal. "I'm not asking anyone to act like nothing happened," I said. "That's the whole point." My voice shook on the last word, and I hated that, but I didn't take it back. The next 24 hours were ugly in a very familiar way. My mother called 6 times and left voicemails about how I was humiliating the family, how my father barely ate dinner, how Lauren cried, how Ethan asked why Aunt Claire didn't love him anymore. Lauren texted me long messages that started with, "I don't understand," and ended with, "You're punishing me for having a family." Then came the one that almost got under my skin. "You're going to end up just like Aunt Elise, alone and bitter, pretending your little hobby is a life." I stared at that message while sitting on my bedroom floor beside my suitcases. For about 10 seconds, it hurt exactly the way she wanted it to. Then I thought about Aunt Elise with her cafe, her pottery studio, her ocean air, her Sunday calls where she actually listened. If that was the warning, it wasn't working anymore. I left before sunrise in my old Honda, the same car my mother hated seeing in the driveway. 3 suitcases in the back, my camera bag on the passenger seat, my laptop wedged behind it, coffee cooling in the cup holder because my stomach was too tight to drink. Boston was still gray and half asleep when I pulled away from my apartment. I expected some huge feeling as I left, something clean and cinematic, but mostly I felt sick. I kept checking the rearview mirror like guilt might be following me in another car. The drive took 5 days because I couldn't bring myself to rush into my new life like I was certain I deserved it. I stopped at cheap motels and roadside diners where nobody knew the Bennett family. Nobody asked me to take anyone's kids to the bathroom. Nobody looked past me to find the person who mattered more. Somewhere in Nebraska, I pulled into a rest stop at sunset and took out my camera. The sky was all orange and pink over the flat road, and I photographed it through the windshield with my hands still shaking. It wasn't the best picture I'd ever taken, but it was the first one I took after choosing myself. On the 4th day, Aunt Elise called while I was getting gas in Arizona. She told me the room above the cafe was ready. Fresh sheets, cleared closet, desk by the window. Then she said Daniel Mercer wanted to meet me the day after I arrived, if I was up for it. My first reaction was panic. I almost said it was too soon, that I needed time to settle, that maybe he had changed his mind, that maybe my work looked better online than it would in a real gallery. Aunt Elise listened to me start spiraling and then said, "Claire, you've been waiting 3 years. This isn't too soon. This is finally." I reached Carmel by the Sea just after 7 p.m. on the 5th day. The ocean appeared before the town did, dark blue under a fading sky, and I had to pull over because I started crying so hard I couldn't see the road. When I finally parked in front of Aunt Elise's cafe, she was standing on the porch in a clay-stained sweater with her arms open. No speech, no guilt, no reminder of what I owed her. Just her saying, "There you are," like I had not abandoned anyone, like I had simply arrived where I was supposed to be. Carmel felt unreal the first morning, and I don't mean that in a pretty way. I mean, I woke up in a small room above Aunt Elise's cafe, heard gulls outside instead of traffic, smelled coffee and bread from downstairs, and for a few seconds I didn't know who I was supposed to be. There was no text from my mother asking me to pick up flowers, no Lauren asking if I could take Ethan for a few hours, no silent pressure waiting at the edge of the bed. Just a narrow desk by the window, my camera bag on the chair, and the ocean sitting there like it had no idea I was terrified. Aunt Elise put me on the morning shift because she said routine helps panic, and she was right. From 6 a.m. to noon, I learned how to make pour-over coffee, wipe down tables, box scones, and remember regulars by name. The work was still work, but it felt different because nobody acted like my time belonged to them by default. At noon, Aunt Elise handed me a sandwich, pointed upstairs, and said, "Eat, then go meet Daniel." I almost laughed because she said it like the simplest thing in the world. Eat lunch, walk 3 blocks, let a stranger decide whether the secret part of your life is real. Coastal Light Gallery was smaller than I expected, but serious in a way that made my mouth go dry. White walls, polished concrete floors, natural light falling across framed photographs like the room had been built to make people stop and look. Daniel Mercer met me near the front desk wearing a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, not the intimidating black suit gallery owner I had invented in my head. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "Claire Bennett, I'm glad you came." Just that. Not, "Aunt Elise told me everything." Not, "You must be overwhelmed." He started with my name and my work, and I had to blink hard because apparently I was easy to undo when someone treated me normally. He had my portfolio open on a large monitor in the back office. I watched my own photographs move across the screen, one after another, and felt almost embarrassed by them being so visible. The woman at the bus stop, the janitor outside the office tower, the cashier leaning against a brick wall after closing, eyes shut, paper hat in one hand. Daniel didn't rush through them. He asked where I took each one, what I remembered, why I framed them the way I did. At one point, he stopped on the bus stop photo and said, "You don't pity her. That's why this works. You let her keep her dignity." I didn't have a practiced answer for that. I told him she had been waiting in the cold for nearly 40 minutes, and people kept walking past like she was part of the bench. He nodded and said, "That's the series." Then he leaned back in his chair and offered me a solo exhibition. 15 pieces, opening in 6 weeks, printing and framing covered by the gallery, 60% of sales to me. My first thought was not joy. It was a hard, suspicious little voice asking what the catch was. That voice sounded a lot like my mother, and I hated that she had followed me all the way to California. The contract made it real in a way compliments hadn't. Daniel's assistant printed it, and there was my name in black type. Artist, Claire Bennett. I stared at those words long enough that Daniel asked if I needed more time. I said no, then yes, then apologized for saying both. He smiled and told me to breathe. I signed anyway, even with my hand shaking, because I knew if I waited for confidence, I might wait forever. When Daniel handed me my copy, I held it against my chest like it could keep me from floating apart. While I was learning how to be a person in California, my family was in Hawaii learning what my absence actually meant. I didn't answer most of the messages, but they still came. Lauren wanted to know where Lily's eardrop instructions were. Bradley wanted the pediatrician's number. My mother wanted to know why Ethan refused to sleep and whether I had ever packed his blue blanket, because apparently nobody else knew it existed. I read the text in the cafe kitchen while labeling cookie boxes and felt a strange, ugly mix of sadness and relief. They missed the service, not me. And that difference finally mattered. The gallery opening happened 6 weeks later on a Friday night. I wore a navy dress Annalise insisted looked grown up, but not like a bank interview. And I stood in the center of a room where 15 of my photographs hung on actual walls with actual price tags beside them. People came because Daniel invited them, because Annalise talked too much, because a local magazine had heard about the show, and because some of them genuinely wanted to see the work. Mrs. Vivian Carlyle, a collector Daniel seemed very eager not to hover over, bought the bus stop photograph for $3,000 before I had even finished my first glass of champagne. I was still trying to process that when the gallery door opened and Lauren walked in, with Bradley behind her. They looked sunburned and out of place, like they had come straight from another life and refused to change costumes. Lauren saw me, widened her eyes, and hurried over with her arms half open. "Claire, oh my God, we've been so worried," she said, loud enough that people turned. I didn't move into the hug. I said, "This is unexpected," which was the polite version of every other sentence in my head. She glanced around the room and finally seemed to understand that this was not a hobby table at a church fair. My photographs were framed, lit, sold, discussed. My name was on the wall near the entrance. Still, she leaned closer and whispered, "I'm pregnant again. We need you to come home." That was the moment the old Claire almost stepped forward. The one who would ask if she was feeling okay, who would feel guilty before she felt angry, who would start rearranging her life around a child that wasn't even born yet. Then Aunt Elise came to stand beside me, quiet and solid, and I remembered the email. Free help. I told Lauren congratulations, and I meant it as much as I could. Then I told her I wasn't coming back to Boston to be childcare. She blinked like I had spoken another language. Bradley stepped in with that tight smile of his and said, "Claire, this is really something, but family is family." Before I could answer, Mrs. Carlyle looked over from beside my photograph and asked, "Is this the family that didn't invite you to Hawaii?" The room went still in a way I recognized, except this time the silence was not swallowing me. It was waiting for them. For a second, nobody moved. Lauren's face changed first, that soft, wounded look she used whenever she wanted the room to believe she was the one being hurt. Bradley's jaw tightened, and I could see him trying to decide whether Mrs. Carlyle was important enough to answer politely. Aunt Elise stayed beside me without touching my arm, which helped more than if she had grabbed me. Daniel stood near the back wall, watching the whole thing, with the careful stillness of someone ready to step in, but willing to let me speak for myself. Bradley gave Mrs. Carlyle a thin smile and said, "I'm sorry, I don't think this is really your business." Mrs. Carlyle didn't flinch. She looked at my bus stop photograph, then back at him, and said, "I bought that piece tonight. I'd say I have a small interest in the artist not being dragged away from her own opening." A few people murmured. Lauren's eyes darted around the gallery, finally realizing that the room was not on her side by default. That was new for both of us, honestly. In my parents' house, Lauren could cry, and everyone rearranged the furniture around her feelings. In that gallery, she was just a woman interrupting someone else's night. Then the door opened again, and my parents walked in. My mother wore her good trench coat, the one she saved for funerals and events where she wanted people to know she had taste. My father came in behind her, looking uncomfortable already, which meant he knew this was bad, but had still chosen to come. Margaret Bennett scanned the gallery like she was inspecting a venue that had disappointed her. When she saw me, she walked straight across the floor and said, "Claire, we need to talk." Not hello, not congratulations, not your work is beautiful, just the same command voice she used when a table setting was wrong. I said, "Not here." My mother looked around and lowered her voice, but not enough. "You left your family in chaos, and now you're making this into some public spectacle." That almost made me laugh because I had not invited any of them. They had flown across the country to stand in my gallery and ask me to come home. I looked at her, then at my father, then at Lauren standing behind them with Bradley's hand on her shoulder. For the first time, I saw the whole arrangement from the outside. They were not worried about me. They were worried that the person who absorbed the inconvenience had stopped absorbing it. My father tried to soften it. "Claire, your mother is upset. Your sister is pregnant. Everyone is under a lot of strain." I nodded because that was probably true. Then I said, "I was under strain too, for years. You just liked mine because it made everyone else's life easier." He looked down at the floor, and that hurt more than if he had argued. My mother stepped in quickly because silence had never served her unless she controlled it. "This is ridiculous. We asked you to babysit. Families help each other. You turned it into some kind of insult. That was when I took out my phone. I didn't do it dramatically. My hand was shaking, and I had to tap the screen twice before I found the screenshots. I said, "You didn't ask me to babysit. You planned to keep me behind because you thought I had nothing important to do." My mother's face went pale before I read anything, which told me she remembered exactly what she had written. I read the email out loud anyway, not shouting, not crying, just the words as they were. "It saves you and Bradley the cost of extra childcare. Honestly, it's like having free help." Then I read Lauren's reply. "She'll probably feel useful. It's kind of sad, but at least it helps us." The room went quiet again, but this time it did not feel like the anniversary dinner. At that dinner, the silence had protected them. This silence exposed them. My mother whispered, "You had no right to read my private email." And for 1 second, I almost accepted the guilt. Then Mrs. Carlyle said very calmly, "That is an interesting concern to lead with." Someone near the back let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not a funny one. Bradley started talking about context, about family jokes, about private stress, but Daniel cut in and said, "This is Claire's opening. I'm going to ask you to respect that or leave." My mother looked at Daniel like she had just noticed he had authority in the room. That was the part she could not manage. In Boston, she knew every social rule, every guest, every polite escape route. Here, she was standing under my name, in front of my photographs, surrounded by people who had come to see what I made. She could not turn me into the difficult daughter without explaining why the difficult daughter had a contract, buyers, a magazine interview, and a room full of witnesses. Her face flushed hard, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother lose control of the story. Lauren started crying then, quietly at first, then harder. She said, "I thought you liked helping." I looked at her and felt tired all the way through. "No," I said, "you didn't think about whether I liked it. None of you did." She covered her mouth, and I could tell the line landed because it was too plain to fight. I told her I hoped the pregnancy went well. I told her I loved Ethan and Lily, because I did, but I would not be their backup parent anymore. If she wanted me in her life, it had to be as her sister, not as the person she called when paid help was inconvenient. My parents left first. My father paused at the door like he wanted to say something, but my mother kept walking, and he followed her because that was what he always did. Lauren and Bradley left a few minutes later. Bradley didn't look at me on the way out. Lauren did, but I couldn't tell if what I saw in her face was regret or embarrassment, and I decided I didn't need to know that night. When the door closed behind them, the gallery stayed quiet for a moment. Then Annalise handed me a glass of champagne and said, "Well, that was a hell of an opening." By the end of the night, 8 of the 15 photographs had sold. Mrs. Carlyle commissioned a coastal piece for her home in Big Sur. The magazine writer stayed until closing and told me she had more than enough for a feature. Daniel handed me the sales printout after the last guest left, and I stared at the number like it was written in another language. My share was more money than I usually made in months of accounting work. I photographed the check later, not to brag, just to have proof for myself. Payable to Claire Bennett. Not helper, not other daughter, not free help. It has been a few months now, and my life is not perfect, but it is mine. I still work mornings at Aunt Elisa's cafe. I rent a small studio 3 blocks away, and my second exhibition is already scheduled. My mother called once and asked if I had gotten this out of my system. I deleted the voicemail. Lauren sent a picture when the baby was born, a little girl named Charlotte, and I sent a gift and a kind message. My father emailed 3 sentences after the magazine article came out. "I saw the feature. I'm proud of you. I should have said that sooner." I kept that one, even though I'm still deciding what to do with it. I think about that night in Boston more than I want to admit. Not because I miss the house or the driveway or the perfect table settings, but because I remember standing there with a dirty plate in my hand while everyone learned where I really ranked. I used to think being useful would eventually earn me a real place. It didn't. It just taught people to reach for me without looking. Now, when I put on an apron at the cafe, it is just an apron. When I pick up my camera, it is mine. And when someone says my name, I don't automatically listen for what they need from me next. If this story hit close to home, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it helps more people find stories like this when they need to hear them. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been treated like the useful one instead of real family? Would you have read the emails out loud or handled it privately? And where do you think the line is between helping family and being used by them?